So, Terry, for those who don't know you, you are the founder and director of Ellington Timepiece, a very beautiful watch company. But your story is quite inspirational, isn't it? You started the company in 2017 when you had only £80 left to
Yeah.
your name. I'm interested to know what made you start your business at that time and where did the idea come from?
It's a bit of a weird one. I've kind of always grown up around fashion and watches. I've always had an interest in fashion, but in terms of watches, it was my granddad. The family joke is that if we lose him when we're out and about, no doubt he'll be stood outside of a shop looking at watches. So I've always seen him change batteries, have a collection. I've always liked accessories. And I also used to be a barmaid actually a couple of years ago, and I used to work in my family's indie nightclub. And I remember that I used to always wear rings and bracelets and things like that. And yeah, I've always had an interest in fashion. And the 2 months before Christmas, when I lost my job, it was kind of in a moment where it was like, well, it's kind of now or never, I guess. I didn't have a lot to my name. I had literally £80 in the bank, and the reason why I talk about the £80 is because the £80 purchased my first sample, which was the grey Sheba sample, which was my first watch. And before that, I because of the salary that I was only a kennel assistant. I couldn't afford a watch that was in my price range that was my style and something unique. And I think that's how I came about the idea of creating something, a watch line. But it was in terms of after I'd kind of started developing the plan and things like that, and started getting you know, into more details about how much it's going to cost to set up this business and things like that. The idea, the limited, came about the fact that I had limited cash flow. So I used that as a way of making my brand's USP in terms of the limited editions. In fact, there's only so many of them, and it turns out that people love that. So that's kind of how it started, really.
Super smart, and that's something that I've noticed with you in the way that you market your brand as well. Because, for instance, I think in your first campaign you were the model, right?
Yeah.
You did,
Yeah.
like you said, limited cash flow. So you're thinking, how can I make this work? Thankfully, you're very beautiful, so you can
Ah, thank you.
you can model your
Thank
own
you.
brand. But that's
Yeah.
really smart. And I guess my next question would have been, how do you even start? Like, what are some of the hurdles that you had to overcome just to get started? And you've mentioned cash flow. Was there anything else?
Yes, it was cash flow. It was also lack of knowledge as well. Before I started Ellington Timepiece, I had no experience in design, no experience in running a business, no experience in the ins and outs, factories, anything like that. And I literally just had to learn. Like every day it was a case of learning. And it was a struggle, but it was a struggle in the sense that it made me I actually enjoyed learning about it. I think that was the difference between something that you have to learn and something that you actually enjoy learning. And I think that when I've spoken to people in business, the reason why they create their business or if they're passionate about it is because they're actually enjoying doing it and they're enjoying learning how to, grow it. So right from the start, I actually enjoyed speaking to the factories and learning all of the different movements and the materials and things like that and the designing process. And then the cash flow came involved because obviously I didn't have endless amounts of money. I went to a local, they're kind of like a funding business. It's a very, very local one. And I remember when I took my business plan and I took my design and etc. And they were very like, they've never heard of anything like that before. They'd never heard of a watch line or anything. And I think it was a nice process. It was a struggling process, like any business when you start up, but I actually enjoyed the learning of it. But that was the struggle as well as the cash flow, yeah.
What are some of the sacrifices that you had to make? Because as you said, you had £80. You could have spent them on some shoes,
Yeah.
but you decided to put it into your business. What are some of the sacrifices that you've had to make and still have to make today?
Yeah, so a lot of in the beginning, the sacrifices were things like not kind of readjusting the way you spend things. So, I mean, I was 20, 21, turning 22 at this time. I stopped going on nights out. I stopped buying the latest, dress, shoes, makeup, things like that. I was buying my makeup on eBay in cheap places, things like that. I remember over the last 2 years, I sold my car to make ends meet. My bed broke in, I think it was just after Christmas. And instead of going out and buying a new bed, what I'd done is I'd slept on the sofa because I'd used that money to put back into the business, buying bracelets, etc.
Oh, wow.
And the time when my sister was at university, I would sleep in her bed. But what happened was is she was struggling herself with anxiety at that time. So she was actually coming home a lot more. So I spent about 5 to 6 months on the sofa, all in all. And I think that the sacrifices that you make continuously are always around kind of cash flows and pushing your business to the next level. So sometimes it is, not spending it on this because it means you need to get this. So there's always sacrifices in so many different ways, whether it be little loss, little or big. Obviously, the biggest one for me was selling my car and sleeping on the sofa. The little sacrifices are things like not going to the pub with your friend or going on a night out, things like that. And you just learn and you just manage. But I suppose it depends on how serious you are. How serious you are depends on the sacrifices that you make. And if you want to make, something of yourself and something of your brand or whatever it is that you have, you will do that. I think that's just part and parcel of having a business.
Something that you mentioned and something that you're very passionate about is using your brand to raise awareness about mental health. Why is that, and why is it so important to you?
Because it's something that I've struggled myself. When I was 16, 17, I struggled with agoraphobia, which meant that I struggled to leave the house. It came about after one night when I had a full-blown panic attack, and I didn't know what was happening to me. It was very scary, and it was almost like the next day when I woke up, I was a completely different person. I didn't realise how ill I actually was because there wasn't any information. When I did go to the doctors, they just said, you'll get over it, you're doing your GCSEs, things like that. And there wasn't any help there for me at the time. Apart from the support of my family, there wasn't any help or knowledge behind the way that I was feeling. So I felt very alone, didn't feel like I could talk to my friends about it because my friends, they were leaving school. They didn't really understand things like that. I had to sit my GCSEs at home. I missed out on prom. I struggled with an eating disorder, and it just spiraled out of control, and I didn't know what to do. And then when I was 17, I got a puppy called Sheba, who's my German Shepherd, who helped me be able to get a routine again. And over that period of time, I learned my own coping mechanisms, and then turned 18, I started taking medication. At this point, Sheba was a little bit older, so I was able to get out the house with her and felt comfortable and safe with her. And eventually I started to manage. But mental health is very important for me because there was a lot of people that will be where like today, that will be where I was when I was 16, at that early stage where you struggle and you think, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to get the help from, I don't understand the way I'm feeling. I'm now at the point in my life with mental health where I call it the third stage. And the third stage is where you've got it for life. Unfortunately, it's a disease that just never goes away, but you learn to manage and you learn to cope. The first stage is back when I was 16, when it first happened for me. And then the second stage is you learning your coping mechanisms. So whichever stage somebody is at, if my story is able to help somebody and I do that through the brand and I'm able to use the brand as a platform to help people, then I can do that. And if it helps just one person, then I feel like I'm doing the right thing.
My question was going to be just going back to when you started your business. So you have got your materials, you've learned all the different design processes, you have your product. Where do you even begin to find customers?
Oh, it was a kind of weird one for me. I literally, once my website went live, I kind of just put it out there on Facebook and said, okay, now I own this watch line. And I remember I made my first sale on that night that it went out, and it was the best feeling in the world. Yeah, I literally I wasn't using any marketing or anything like that. I just put it up there, and then just slowly it became kind of like word of mouth from my area. So in my area, it's quite funny. I'm called the Watch Lady. That's my nickname now, and it's kind of gotten a little bit weird. Yeah. So it's like it's just a weird one, and now when I do go to a local shop or something like that, someone will say, "You're that watch lady." So it's a bit weird, but back then it was a case of just knocking on like knocking on my neighbours' doors, handing out leaflets. I had a little. I contacted the House of Fraser department store in Middlesbrough and asked if would be able to have a little pop-up stand. So this was in the summer, and I was completely nervous. I was stood next to the likes of Michael Kors and all of these other brands, and I thought, I'm just not. This isn't going to work for me. I just had this feeling inside that I was really nervous, and I just didn't know if people were going to purchase my watches. And then just slowly, after a while, people started coming over and asking who I was, what it was that I was showing, and within one weekend of it was the August bank holiday weekend, I sold out my entire stock that I had with me that day, and it was the most best feeling ever. And I remember the managers and a couple of the people that worked there who I'd actually formed a friendship with were kind of like looking at me like, how have you done this? And I generally was like, I have no idea. But people were coming over and asking about the products and asking about my story, and I think it was around at that point when I realized just how important it is to talk about mental health, because the customers that were purchasing my watches were saying things like, I'm going to buy this watch because my son is currently at home, not, struggling with mental health, and I want to show him what can be achieved. And that was the best feeling in the world for me. So right at the beginning, it just became a case of word of mouth until the brand just started to grow.
What would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned since 2017 until now in business?
Probably the biggest lesson I think for myself is patience. Is a big one. I think probably, and it came around the age of when I was struggling from mental health, because I was thinking, when am I going to get over this, or when am I going to be able to feel better? And I lacked a lot of patience, I think, and especially at the beginning of my business as well. And you just can't have that in business. You have to have patience. Things don't happen, in a split second. A month is a blink of an eye in business world. So probably patience is the biggest lesson that I've learned. Yeah, definitely.
Finally, thank you very much for being with us today. With all the news that's coming out about the COVID virus and the craziness that's happening with the economy and the recession that may or may not be coming, what would you say to young women like yourself who are thinking about setting up a business or a brand in this current climate?
I think that in this season, it's a case of patience, due diligence, and setting a plan. And I've spoken to a few women who are either at the start of the journey or kind of in the middle. And I always just say that if you can plan as much as you are able to for when this does blow over, so that as soon as all of it blows over, as soon as the day they say, right, everything goes back to normal, all you need to do is press the green button and you're away. Don't leave anything, if you can, till the last minute. Plan ahead, because when you plan ahead, you're able to just go with it. And my other little bit of advice would be to just do it. That it's just literally as simple as that. If you believe in yourself, and don't worry if you don't have the funds, don't worry if you don't have the knowledge or whatever, because I didn't have any of those things. I didn't have any of that when I first started. And I hope that my journey is able to inspire people that, just do it and just go for it and do it as an experience. And yeah, so that's my advice. Yeah, definitely.
Teri Ellington of Ellington Timepiece, thank you very much for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.